Mario Guerrero is a faculty member at Cal Poly Pomona, and he's the author of Facebook Changes Politics, Social Networking Websites and Political Engagement. Very interesting topic, very timely, and we're looking forward to the talk. So thank you, Mario.
Just clip it. Thank you. All right. Hello. How's it going? Good. I'm happy to be here, and thank you for coming out, and thanks to the center for inviting me to come speak. As Dr. Huckfeld said, my name is Mario Guerrero. I'm an assistant professor at Cal Poly Pomona in political science. I study American politics, and I research a whole bunch of things, but one of the things that I research is Facebook and social networking sites. This project that I'm presenting today is actually a series of projects. I've worked on a number of different manuscripts that center on Facebook, but it's actually a co-authored effort. So I have two colleagues, one Jessica Fizel at the University of New Mexico, and another Meredith Conroy at CSU San Bernardino. And together, we've presented at conferences and published in various outlets. And what I'm presenting today is kind of a combination of all of this. So you're getting the whole package today, I guess you can say. And the title of my talk is Facebook Changes Politics, Social Networking Websites and Political Engagement. Now, the way that I will break up the discussion today is in three major sections. First, I'm going to be talking about why Facebook is important. So this question will really address why this medium. Why are we choosing to study Facebook? And then I'll discuss the methods that we use in our various topics, our various papers rather. So it's a multi-method study. And then I'll break up the results into three different sections. I will talk about political engagement. So how does Facebook affect engagement? And engagement defined as political participation and political knowledge. So does Facebook have particular effects on how people participate in politics? And does Facebook have particular effects on what people know about politics? In the second results section, I'll discuss our content analysis. And our content analysis is a really nice explanation for what we find in part A of the results. So we look at the discussion that happens on Facebook to explain why we see a particular effect with participation and knowledge. And that's a pretty interesting section of the analysis. And then I'll end by talking about political participation specifically. So we see specific effects with political participation, meaning that Facebook affects different types of participation more so than others. And we find a pattern that we think is relatively interesting, slightly nuanced, but we think is important for the direction of this field. So to begin, I'm addressing this question of why is Facebook important? So I believe that we all can agree that Facebook, the internet, is changing the way that we communicate, organize, and socialize with one another. And we see this in everyday life. I mean, most everybody has a mobile phone, and they have Facebook on that phone. Most people are on Facebook when they log on to the internet. They keep it open in a browser. I know I do. I'm a little bit addicted. But I reference a Pew study here, and in 2013, I think last month, Pew published some interesting numbers. They surveyed young people across the country, and they found that 95% of young people actually regularly access the internet. So that may not be surprising to some of you, especially those of you that are young. But when we look at social media usage of young people in this country, we find that 93% of young people have a Facebook account. So most young people in this country are logged on to Facebook. And of those 95%, or 93% rather, 59% of them use Facebook as their sole social media website. So they're only logged onto Facebook, and they're not logged onto other websites like MySpace or Friendster or whatever is out there. So Facebook is in wide usage across the country, especially with young people. I don't know why that changed. So it's an important question to ask how this type of online interaction affects politics. So what specific effects does Facebook have on politics, if any? So the literature on Facebook is pretty extensive. The literature on the internet and its effect on politics is pretty extensive. Scholars have studied the internet and political science for more than 10 years now. And what we find is that the discussion is broken up into two different camps. There are people that are optimists and there are people that are pessimists. And optimists believe that internet usage can positively affect political engagement. So internet usage does indeed affect participation and knowledge in a very positive way. So when you use the internet, you develop social capital, and that encourages you to feel more efficacious. It encourages you to participate, to vote more, and you're learning more by the process of finding information online. But there are pessimists who disagree, and part of the reason why the pessimists disagree is with this idea that we need to open up internet usage. We need to investigate different types of internet usage to find out how different websites and their uses affects engagement in different ways. So internet use, just broadly speaking, is too blunt of a measure. And in this project, what we do is we look at one specific aspect. We focus on social interaction on the internet, and social interaction specifically in groups. So how do online groups affect political engagement? Now, before I get into online groups and the literature behind that, we know quite a bit about offline face-to-face groups and the benefits that come from that. So with offline face-to-face interaction in groups, we know that this encourages the development of things like political trust. It encourages the development of democratic values. It encourages political skills that are necessary for participation. So the benefits of participating in face-to-face groups is great. So does this kind of translate to online groups? Can we see these same effects with the discussion that occurs in online groups? And the literature is a little bit mixed on this. We know that online groups do facilitate discussion, and you probably know that just from logging onto Facebook. You see that people discuss politics all the time. But what ends up happening is that this discussion is characterized in two somewhat negative ways. First, the discussion tends to be pretty homogenous. You're discussing politics with people online that tend to believe what you believe as well. You're self-selecting yourself into specific groups, so the discussion that you're having is not very diverse. Secondly, the discussion tends to be anonymous, so you don't have the same sort of enforcement that you would in face-to-face interaction, where you would be responsible for your discussion, you would be responsible for your viewpoints. So people hide behind their anonymity, people hide behind maybe fake identities or multiple identities, and they're not accountable for their points of view in online groups. So since online groups tend to be pretty homogenous and characterized by anonymity, we question the validity of online groups in facilitating political engagement. Now, we look in this project or this series of papers about how Facebook groups specifically affect political engagement. There's no literature before our manuscript that actually addressed this issue. So it's important at this stage to explain why Facebook. So Facebook began actually 9 years ago this month. It celebrated its 9th birthday. It started in the dorm room of Mark Zuckerberg, and it was exclusively a social networking site for college students. You needed an .edu address to sign up. Well, today, Facebook is one of the most popular websites in the world. It exchanges with Google for the #1 spot all the time. But there are over 1 billion active users on the site today. Of those 1 billion users, 618 million log on to Facebook on a daily basis. And while many of the first users and adopters of Facebook were college students, Facebook has now grown to include members of all different ages and people all over the world. So simply for its popularity, we decided to examine Facebook as a potential unit of study, our unit of interest here. Now, there's various ways to interact with politics on Facebook. You can update your status with a political statement, and your friends would respond to that status. You can like a political Facebook page, so politicians will get on Facebook and start their own page. Political organizations will start their own page. Interest groups even start their own page. And as a member, you have the opportunity to like this page, and you can get regular updates from these organizations and politicians. One of the facets that we tend to focus on are the political use of Facebook groups. So this is what we investigate in our project. And Facebook groups allow users to choose amongst a variety of different topics. There's a whole bunch of topics on Facebook groups that span the political spectrum. So the example that's on the overheads is 1 million strong for Barack Obama, but you can find groups with topics that range anywhere from Stop Obamacare to immigration reform to No on Prop 8. So there are pretty much groups for everything. Now, what's nice about these groups is that anybody that's a user of Facebook can join these groups, and you can have political discussions on these groups, but you do not have to friend other members. So essentially, Facebook is bringing relative strangers together and having them discuss specific political topics. So this brings us to the research question that we address in our project, and that is, can online groups like this, can Facebook online groups help to foster political engagement amongst youth? So does membership in political Facebook groups encourage things like participation, voting, donating, volunteering? And does it increase your levels of political knowledge? Are you likely to know more about politics as a result of joining these groups? So in the rest of this lecture, we'll kind of address this question in a variety of different ways, but we start by examining two hypotheses. And before we set out and actually conducted anything, we settled on the first hypothesis, which is online political group membership, so being a member of these Facebook groups, does lead to increased levels of political participation. So if you join political Facebook groups, you are more likely to do things like go vote, or donate to a campaign, or sign a petition, or attend a rally. So the discussion that occurs on these groups, and they do occur all the time, actually encourages people to participate. Now, the kicker is with the second hypothesis, and the second hypothesis is online political group membership does not lead to increased levels of political knowledge. So if you're a member of these Facebook groups about politics, you're not necessarily learning anything about politics. And this makes sense when you consider the nature of online groups. So remember, I talked about how online groups offer a relative amount of anonymity. They tend to be pretty homogeneous. So if that's the case, we tend to see this discussion be of relatively low quality and have little information. People may be very opinionated on these discussion boards, but it's not really teaching you anything about politics because of the fact that, it's just low quality information. Okay, so moving on to the next section, which is the methodology. I'm going to explain how we address these two hypotheses. So we have a multi-method study, and we do both a survey and a content analysis. So the survey is a repeated cross-sectional study, meaning that we just administered same survey twice, once in the spring of 2009 and the fall of 2013, so we just finished up another round recently. And our total sample includes 687 undergraduates in Southern California from all different types of universities. When we look at the sample, it closely mirrors the population statistics of college students across California. And we primarily surveyed students that are enrolled in political science courses. So you might be saying, well, aren't people enrolled in political science courses more likely to be involved in politics, more likely to join these political groups? Absolutely. And we attempt to control for this by having measures of political interest and year in school in our analysis, but I'll discuss this more in depth later. And in the instrument itself, in the survey itself, we ask questions about Facebook usage. So how often do you post status updates? How often do you like pages? How often do you join groups? And within this usage, how much of it is political? So do you frequently like political Facebook pages? Do you join political Facebook groups, et cetera, et cetera? We also ask about levels of offline participation. So did you vote? And if you vote, how frequently do you vote? Do you vote in every election, just the presidential elections? Do you sign petitions? How frequently do you sign petitions? Do you attend rallies? How frequently do you do that? So we're trying to see how college students participate offline as well. And we also ask questions about political knowledge, and these questions have been established by the political science literature as being pretty representative of the total knowledge that somebody should have about politics. So there's a battery that exists that we used. So if you answer these questions correctly, you tend to be more politically knowledgeable. We also employ content analysis. So in the content analysis, what we're doing is we've selected 39 random Facebook groups from a list that was provided by Facebook. And within these 39 groups, we randomly select 20 wall posts. So this gives us a sample size of 780 wall posts. And within these wall posts, we analyze them for their information content, their opinion strength, and their quality. So in the content analysis, we're really looking at the discussion that's happening on these groups to see what type of discussion is going on. Now, there are two things about the methodology that I want to point out before going to the results. The first thing is that in our statistical analysis, we controlled for a variety of different variables. We controlled for sex, we controlled for age, we controlled for income. Most college students don't have an independent source of income, so we asked about family level of income. We control for party identification, race, political interest, year in school. Remember, this is how we kind of account for the fact that most of our sample comes from political science courses. And we also account for online news consumption. So online news consumption is a binary dichotomous variable that shows whether or not people actually seek out news in these aggregation services like Google News or Yahoo News. There's research out there that suggests that these people who do this end up voting more. So as a result of that research, we decided to include this control variable. And we also include a control variable on privacy. So there are some people who are more private than others on Facebook. They increase their privacy settings, and they're more likely to be less active on the site. So this is a 4-point scale that we include in the analysis. You'll see these control variables when they pop up in a regression table that I'll show in a few slides. But ultimately, the equation at the bottom of the screen indicates what we're trying to do. We're trying to predict political engagement, and political engagement is being defined by participation and knowledge. And we're trying to predict these two variables as a function of political group membership and all these different control variables that are listed on the screen. So we try to cover our bases with the statistical analysis. Now, the second thing that I want to mention about the methodology is that there's a possibility that this relationship exists in reverse, that it's not online group membership that's causing people to participate, but rather the other way around. So people that are participating in politics are more likely to join these groups on Facebook. So we realize that this is a problem, and it's a common problem, I guess, in most statistical analysis like these. And we attempt to control for this statistically by using what's called a two-stage least squares analysis. And the basic idea behind that is that we take this primary variable that we're interested in, a political group membership, and we instrument that with two other variables that are not directly correlated. So we instrument political group membership with length of membership on Facebook and frequency of logon to Facebook, and hopefully this will take care of any potential endogenous relationship. All right, on to the results. So once again, the results are organized into 3 different sections. First, I'll examine how political Facebook group use affects engagement. So engagement meaning participation and knowledge. And in this section, I'll examine a couple of regression tables, but essentially what we're showing here is that Facebook does indeed encourage participation, but it does not stimulate levels of political knowledge. Then we move on to the second section in the analysis, and we find in the content analysis that the discussion on these groups tends to be pretty bad. It tends to be of low information, low quality, kind of what I suggested before. So we'll get into that in depth, and we'll look at those results. And then we'll end with a section on participation specifically, and this is where our project has been going as of late. We're trying to break open how Facebook affects participation and the fact that we see that Facebook political use affects participation in distinct ways, that it affects some forms of participation and not others. And there's a strong pattern that emerges here. Okay, so beginning with the first section, this regression table shows Facebook's the political use of Facebook's effect on participation. So does using these groups affect your levels of participation offline? So on the left here in this first column, you see a series of variables. The first two are of what are most important, political group membership. That's what we're really primarily interested in. but the other remaining variables on this list are the control variables that I went over in a previous slide. Now the second column is the OLS, or the just regular regression. Again, because of this problem of endogeneity, it doesn't do us too much use to use those results. And what we're primarily interested in is this third column. So this third column where this box has been highlighted, that's the statistic that we're after. So this box tells us whether or not group membership on Facebook positively affects political participation. So this relationship is indeed significant, and that's why it's shaded in blue. And what we see here is that if you're a member of a group on Facebook that's political, you tend to be likely to participate in 2 more political activities offline. So political group membership on Facebook leads you to do 2 more things that you normally wouldn't do. So you're going out there and voting and signing a petition, or signing a petition and donating. So this is a significant and relatively strong effect. So the people that are joining these groups look very different than the people who do not join these groups in terms of their offline political participation. So that's all well and great, but what about knowledge? So we switch to knowledge in this next slide. Now the analysis is somewhat identical, with the only exception that knowledge is now the dependent variable. So again, we're interested in political group membership, and that's at the top of the list on the left column. And the remaining variables, again, are the same exact controls. Second column is our OLS, our regular regression. Doesn't do us very much use because of this endogeneity problem, so we're interested in the 2-stage least squares. Again, we're interested in the box that's highlighted in red. And here we see that this relationship between political group membership and political knowledge is not significant. So this relationship does not exist. There is no real discernible difference between people who use these groups and not, in terms of their levels of political knowledge. So this suggests that you're not learning anything, at least political information, as a result of joining these Facebook groups. So in terms of a conclusion for this section on engagement, right, engagement being both participation and knowledge, political Facebook groups seem to have mixed effects. It encourages participation, but it doesn't enhance your levels of political knowledge. So the good question to ask at this point is why? What's going on? So in the second section of the analysis, we introduce the content analysis. And the content analysis really goes into these groups, on these discussion boards, and tries to figure out what's going on to kind of produce this effect. So the first part of the content analysis looks at the information posted by group administrators. So these are the people that start the groups. And these could be anybody. You can start a group if you really wanted to on Facebook. And the group administrators have the ability to post information on the group. So they could choose not to post anything. They can choose to post the links. They can choose to post contact information. But the idea is that, are these group administrators posting enough information that allows people to access real political information that would make these groups a good ground for discussion? So this is kind of the preliminary analysis, and the results for this show that for the most part, group administrators are posting a good amount of information on these groups. 62% of group administrators provide additional contact information for people to contact group administrators on Facebook or outside of Facebook. And most of these administrators are providing web links, video links, news links, and photos. So the majority of them are. The only exception to what the group administrators are not doing is posting event information. So only 20% of these admins are posting event information, allowing people to access or go to events in real life. But for the most part, these group administrators do try to foster a good environment for people to seek out information and potentially discuss political information in these groups. So that's good, but what about the actual discussion? This is where the real question lies, right? So this group up here on the overhead is Repeal Obamacare, and this is an example of a discussion that's happening on the group. This person heard something on a radio show, shared it with the group, and a couple of group members responded. So this type of discussion does happen pretty frequently on Facebook groups. And what we did is that we analyzed these discussion posts for their information content, opinion strength, and quality. So we had, again, remember, 780 random Facebook posts that we selected from 39 different randomly selected groups. And in terms of information content, what we're measuring is whether or not any new information is introduced on these wall posts. So ideally, people would be bringing new information, at least consistently throughout the conversation. I'll continue on. We're also looking at opinion strength. So are these wall posts opinionated, or are they indifferent? Are they neutral? And we're also looking at quality. So what are the quality of these Facebook posts? Do they provide inaccurate information? Are they supporting evidence with these posts? Ideally, you would like to see people supporting their opinions with good quality information and explaining that information. So the results suggest, one, that the information on these wall posts are not very informative. 44% of these posts are not introducing any information whatsoever. 40% of them do introduce some posts or some new information, but they don't do much to explain them. And 16% introduce information, and they do a pretty good job at explaining what that new information means to the discussion. So the majority, or at least a plurality of the posts, tend to be low information. They're not very informative. In terms of opinion strength, these posts tend to be fairly opinionated. And I don't know if this is surprising to most of you, but 76% of these wall posts actually have a point of view. And if you've ever been on these Facebook groups, or if you've ever been part of any type of political discussion online, people tend to want to share their opinions, or even oversharing their opinions at sometimes. Only 24% of these posts tend to be neutral. So yes, Facebook posts are opinionated, but they don't have a lot of information. So what about the quality of the opinion of these posts? What we see here is that 26% of these wall posts tend to have inaccurate information. So they're just completely wrong in their assessment of their opinion. Now, 50% of the posts have an opinion, but they offer no evidence whatsoever with that opinion. Now, 21% offer evidence, which indicates that's a good quality post, but they're not explaining anything about that evidence. And 3% of posts introduce evidence to explain their opinion, and they do a fairly good job at analyzing that evidence. So in total, in sum, what we see is that these posts, sure, they are opinionated, but they tend to be low information and pretty low quality. This kind of helps us explain the finding from the first section, right? That Facebook encourages participation, you're having discussion, you're feeling that you're more part of the political system, but because of the nature of the discussion on these walls, right, you're not learning any new information. In fact, there's a lot of information that's being exchanged that tends to be fairly inaccurate. The last section of our study focuses on political participation specifically. So this is kind of what we've done recently, and what we're looking at here is how online Facebook usage affects different forms of participation. And we expected to find that Facebook doesn't treat all forms of participation equally, meaning that if you participate in political Facebook use, you're likely to do some activities, but not others. And what we focus on is this conceptualization of participation advanced by Dalton. And Dalton has this idea of participation as structured in two categories. The first category being engaged forms of participation. So engaged meaning social, not really having to do with government institutions, at least directly. So these forms of participation include signing a petition, attending a rally, or boycotting. The other form of participation that Dalton suggests are duty-based forms of participation. So these duty-based forms have to do with government institutions. They tend to be a little bit more isolated than engaged forms, and they include things like voting, donating to a campaign, or volunteering for a campaign. So when we look to see how online political Facebook use differs in terms of how it affects these two types of participation, we see startling results. So starting with engaged or social forms of participation, what we see here is that online political activity on Facebook positively affects these forms of participation. So this is highlighted in the red box. These relationships tend to be significant. So participating in politics on Facebook positively affects attending a rally, boycotting, and signing a petition. So if you're active politically on Facebook, you're likely to do these three activities, which Dalton characterizes as engaged. On the other hand, when we look at duty-based participation, so voting, volunteering, or donating, we see that this effect is not significant. So online political activity on Facebook does not affect voting, volunteering, and donating. So Facebook usage, at least politically, has very different effects for different forms of participation. So this is somewhat alarming coming to the end of the lecture. I've painted a picture here, right, that Facebook does indeed encourage participation. So it encourages participation in a way that it only affects specific forms of political participation, right, engaged forms. And at the same time, online political Facebook use doesn't do anything for your levels of political knowledge. So the natural question, I guess, when we come to the end of the lecture is this creating this poor standard for participatory democracy in this country? Now, there's some literature out there that suggests that American citizens don't need real political information to actually make good political decisions. And that research has been in existence in a while. So there's that, but at the same time, we still have to contend with this question that I initially introduced, and we still have to figure out how different forms of internet use affect engagement, because we see that it affects engagement in very specific ways, in ways that can be potentially harmful. So thank you, and I look forward to any questions that you might have. Question? Yeah, so I think your question really surrounds like how much does Facebook as a kind of company or institution affect what we see online, right? And how does that affect your participation? I'm not sure. It's almost impossible to figure that information out as a researcher because Facebook isn't going to be upfront with what they do exactly. But this is something that I've noticed increasingly in my own usage of Facebook, that they put up sponsored posts and they move up certain friends' posts than others, and they even target ads at you based on where you surf online. It's a little scary. I was reading an article that said that as long as you have Facebook open on your browser, they're monitoring everything else you're doing on your computer. So it's a good question, like how much are they censoring what you see on Facebook, and how does that affect how you participate politically? It's something that we can't answer. I know Facebook has a data team, and I know Facebook's data team is pretty good about putting, respectful information up there. They're good researchers, but I don't know if they've really addressed this question specifically. Yeah. Like status updates. Yeah, so in this last section where I talked about duty-based versus engaged, that included status updates. So it included status updates, political pages, and groups. So total political usage of Facebook. So we see that it encourages specific forms of participation, those being social, but not traditional forms that have to do with the government. So there's that. We didn't really investigate kind of the discussion that's going on with status updates. The problem being is that we only have access to our own friends' status updates, right? We don't have access to the extensive amount of data that Facebook has on individuals across the board. So it'd be interesting to see, for sure, how status updates can affect participation in terms of engagement but we're not able to do so. You mean is there a difference for smaller local groups? Absolutely. So just kind of anecdotally, we saw differences in these larger groups. I mean, we kind of focused initially on like 1 million strong for Barack Obama because those are the most visible. But there are tons of groups on Facebook that are just local, that are just small groups of people kind of talking about politics. The discussion either tends to be much better in those types of groups. I mean, it's a smaller group of people to begin with. So they actually are kind of more responsible for the things that they're saying. Rather, when you compare that to what's going on with like 1 million strong for Barack Obama, there's just a whole bunch of spam on those things. And if people are discussing any type of information, they're just trolling each other, right? And they're just kind of seeing, can I incite anger in the other person? So the discussion tends to be fairly better in the smaller groups. One thing to note, though, is that in some of these smaller groups, there is no discussion going on. So people will create smaller groups, and they'll have members in them, but the discussion tends to be pretty basic, if anything. So sometimes people don't actually use them. Yeah. Yeah. So theoretically, we controlled for this effect, right? That these students are interested in politics. So the analysis that I presented should have cleared all that concern out. We looked at non-majors in our sample because we had a few of them, and we see that they don't differ too much from majors. They tend to be pretty similar in terms of the way that they use Facebook. They tend to be pretty similar in terms of how they participate. So majors aren't necessarily participating more, which is something that we didn't really expect. But I'm not sure what's going on exactly with that. Yes? Absolutely. So one of the things that I researched that I did not present on here with Facebook is how to use Facebook groups in college courses. So I use Facebook in my courses as a means to get people to study together and to discuss information together. And what I've found when I've started these groups in my classes is that if I don't moderate them, they tend to get out of hand pretty quickly. So if I'm absent completely from the conversation, which I've done before, the students will get on these walls and they'll start posting ridiculous things and they'll start making ridiculous comments. And it's all in good fun. It's not really substantive in terms of the course. But the minute that I'm on there and they see that I'm on there, they'll take special care in like making sure their comments are appropriate and making sure that their comments are appropriate to the class. So they spend a lot of time thinking about what they say. Some people are afraid, actually, once I'm there to post information because they want to make sure that it's right. So I think it's good in the sense that it's challenging them to really think about what they post before they post it. So as a group administrator, that doesn't even have anything to do with college courses. The important part of this is the moderation. You need to have, somebody there moderating the discussion. A website that does this is Reddit. So Reddit has moderators, and there's political discussion that goes on Reddit. Now there's various things going on with Reddit, and I don't study Reddit because it's kind of crazy. But Reddit, R-E-D-D-I-T, 2 Ds, yes. And it's a similar concept. It's like a social networking site. You post various items and you can have discussions about those items, but they have group moderators there. So the group moderators do facilitate communication, so it stays within topic, but at the same time, the moderators kind of hijack the conversation and delete posts that they don't agree with. So moderation is important, but only to a certain extent, right? You don't want to over-moderate the discussion. Yeah, so I think you're right that it encourages specific types of participation. So it's really good at bringing people, out to rallies or boycotts and whatnot. Um, I'm not sure if it really increases the ability of people to donate or pushes people to donate. And people like to say that social networking sites encourage donations because of Obama. And I don't think that's happening so much. You don't see that really outside of the presidential campaigns too much, and it really didn't take off the way that people thought it would. So I do believe it's restricted to those particular forms of participation, although more studies do need to be done outside of college students. The one takeaway that I would say for campaigns trying to start groups or pages is that it really is a mechanism to spread information. So as a moderator, you can choose when to release specific information to the campaign or the candidate, and people will read it and people will get those updates on their newsfeed. So I think in that regard, apart from encouraging those specific forms of participation, it's really a useful mechanism to spread information to a wide amount of people. Yes. Yeah, so I think at the end I mentioned that there's some people who believe that we don't need to be a knowledgeable society in order to participate well. We can make reasoned political decisions without an extensive battery of knowledge, and we do that through having these information shortcuts, heuristics. We use these heuristics as kind of a way to get to good political decisions. So I don't know if that's really an ultimate goal of this. I think it'd be nice if people were learning something on Facebook. It's definitely a concern, but I don't know if these groups will eventually get to that point. Not necessarily. I mean, I think it's nice that people are learning about politics on Facebook, but I don't think it really necessarily means that we need knowledge in order for people to participate well in society. There's research that suggests that we don't. So I'm not taking a stance either way. I'm hesitant to take a stance, but probably through the moderation, like what I was talking about before. I mean, that's the only way that you can kind of get reasoned political discussion on these groups, right? Because the the goal is to get good discussion that's of high quality and of high information. And if you have somebody moderating that discussion, then you can say, well, what do you mean by this? Or can you provide more information? Can you provide a link and explain that? And that's, I think, the way that people would learn from this type of discussion online. Yes. From what I remember, and it's been a while since I looked at income, my only impression of that right now is that our sample was pretty well off in total. A lot of our sample came from the UC Santa Barbara, and UC Santa Barbara is, in terms of income, one of the richest UCs, if not the richest UC. So I remember that being alarming to begin with, is that income level across sample was relatively high. But I don't remember anything specific about the effects on participation, unfortunately. We hope so. I mean, we don't have the resources to sample national populations. We're trying to work with Pew data right now, which is national level data, to see if this effect still exists. But there have been similar studies that have looked at similar ideas that we've kind of pointed out, and we seem to find that it does increase participation, at least political use of Facebook generally. Not groups, but just political use of Facebook does increase participation. Yes. Yep. The ideal and what we would love to do is to have a national sample, but to have a panel. and to investigate this effect over time. One of the things that is problematic with Facebook is that Facebook changes all the time. This morning, my Facebook added this graph search, and it's frustrating. And it completely changes the way that you interact with the medium. So when we conducted the first version of this survey in 2009, Facebook looked really differently than it does today. So it's great that we have these types of results, but for us, the results don't really hold water because Facebook changes so much, and opinions about Facebook change so much. So it would be really interesting to see how this effect looks over time, and also because we want to know if people learn more from Facebook as they use it more, right? I've been on Facebook since it started, since 2004, and I want to know, have I really learned anything about Facebook? I mean, about politics from Facebook, because politics is a really important part, at least of my interaction, and I'm a political scientist, and a lot of my friends are political scientists. So I read a lot about politics on Facebook. But I want to know, and I want to see how this effect looks over time across the national population. So that would be nice. Panel study. Be great. Yes? We conducted a content analysis shortly after the first survey, so probably late 2009, early 2010. So we restricted ourselves to the groups that were online at that time. And I want to say it was all the groups that existed that were still not deleted on the site itself. Absolutely. Yeah. Right. So it comes from a whole bunch of different time periods. Although groups wasn't introduced as a function on Facebook until I think 2006 or 2007. So it's limited in that regard. Yeah. Yep. It's surprising that they were not as private as I thought they should be. And I see this with my students. And when I was in college, I didn't really care what I was putting out there. For most part, yeah, the students don't have too many privacy restrictions. It tends to be something that increases with age. Significant. Yeah, so I wasn't responsible for the methods for the second part of the study, so I can't tell you exactly how they differ. It was my colleague. We did question people in the second version of the survey about mobile use. As far as I know, we haven't done anything with that yet. So we know that there are people that primarily access Facebook on their mobile phones, and that limits the kind of information that you can find on Facebook. So the experience would probably be much different, although that's something that we haven't explored yet. Thanks a lot. Thank you for having me.